history of this proud detachment begins at a desperate battle in the Revolutionary War. On January 17, 1781, feigning a retreat of his troops, Brigadier General Daniel Morgan won a stunning victory, which was a turning point in the war in South Carolina and overall. Eventually leading to the Battle of Yorktown, the surrender of the British forces, and victory for the United States of America. To help the people of South Carolina heal from the ravages of war, the University of South Carolina was established in 1801 in the heart of Columbia, South Carolina. Not even 60 years later, civil war would tear the country apart and secession would begin, originating from a church in Columbia. The birth of air power would be seen using balloons as reconnaissance elements. But the war would come back home to Columbia, with the center of the city burned, thousands of slaves freed, and eventual reconciliation from the horrors of war. As after the Revolutionary War, recovery and healing would follow, and familiar buildings would begin to shape the campus. Then, war again comes to the United States, this time in the Great War, where the heroes of the air like Eddie Rickenbacker and General Billy Mitchell would give us the first sense of the need for an independent air service to defend this nation. With U.S. influence on the global stage rising, and the roaring 20s and the success of a not-so-young country anymore, would soon be followed by the Great Depression, and following that lean, hungry time, once again into war. This time a global catastrophe, World War II, with the attack on Pearl Harbor.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
But from this attack would rise new heroes like General Jimmy Doolittle and William Glover Farrow, a student at USC who joined the Army Air Service and was one of the 16 pilots to fly an Army Air Force bomber off of the deck of an aircraft carrier to fly a strike against Japan in retaliation. World War II would see the rise of the Army Air Forces to become the largest air force in the world. A force that would bring the Axis powers to their knees and secure victory for the Allied forces and the world. Led by General Hap Arnold, the first General of the Air Force, in 1947, the National Security Act would recognize the Air Force as an independent service. And immediately the Air Force would be tested by the Berlin blockade and the airlift that helped so many hungry Berliners, led by men like Gail Halvorson, who would drop candy to starving children. Then to Korea, where jet fighters would dogfight for the first time over the skies of MiG Alley in Korea. Acknowledging the lessons of history, the Air Force maintained air superiority throughout the war. In the midst of the Korean conflict, Detachment 775 of Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps was established at the University of South Carolina. Begun in July of 1949, by 1950 it would have 300 cadets assigned, rising to over 700 cadets by 1952. The detachment would see its first African American cadets in the 1960s. And along with a difficult struggle for civil rights, America would find itself once again at war, this time over the skies of Vietnam, where Strategic Air Command B-52s would lead arc light strikes over the jungles of Vietnam and Laos. Even an awards ceremony was interrupted by protesters in 1972. Also in the 70s, the detachment would see its first female cadets, and in 1977 would assign a female to be Cadet Wing Commander. Throughout the 80s and into the 90s, the Cadet Wing changed, and again, alumni went off to war in places like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq. The detachment motto: higher, faster, farther. Throughout their time here on the campus, the cadets have always had an influence, and now their influence is needed more than ever in the fight against terrorism today. And wherever they go in the Air Force and in whatever they do, the cadets and the future leaders of the United States Air Force from Detachment 775 will always remember. The cadets will remember the mission of Detachment 775 is to create officers of character, higher, faster, and farther.